Welcome to the Road to Care podcast hosted by SamaCare, where we will talk with key opinion leaders, physicians, administrators, manufacturers, venture capitalists, and legislators to get their insights on the state of healthcare today and where we see it evolving. SamaCare's prior authorization platform is free to clinics, ensuring patients get on the right therapy at the right time. Together, we can simply make things right. Okay, welcome back to the Road to Care podcast, everybody, and happy 2026. I can't believe it's here. As you can see, we've got a brand new studio. We've got fancy headphones we've splurged for, and we're looking forward to a great show. We've got a panel of three doctors today and our CEO, Syam Palakurthy. Our panel, Dr. Amitabh Singh, Dr. Indranil Bagchi, and Dr. Cristina Masseria. Dr. Singh is a highly experienced and accomplished leader in market access, health economics, and real-world evidence generation. With nearly 30 years of experience in major pharmaceutical companies such as AbbVie, Wyeth, Pfizer, and Novartis, Dr. Singh is passionate about building scalable and groundbreaking capabilities to enhance value differentiation and demonstration, and a proven track record of leading successful teams in areas such as value and access, pricing and reimbursement, and evidence generation. Dr. Singh has an MPhil in international trade and econometrics and a PhD in economics. Dr. Singh retired 2 years ago. In his final position, he held the role of worldwide head and vice president of HEOR, HEOR, and Novartis Oncology. Dr. Bagchi currently serves as global head of pricing and market access at GSK, where he drives overall strategy on value demonstration and market access across all product areas in the GSK portfolio. Dr. Bagchi has extensive experience and proven track record in leading value and access, pricing, reimbursement, and health outcomes functions in major companies, including GlaxoSmithKline, Wyeth, Pfizer, and Novartis. Dr. Bagchi has an MS in healthcare administration and a PhD in pharmaceutical socioeconomics. And Dr. Masseria currently serves as vice president of value and access for AESARA, a digital forward market access agency. Prior to that, Dr. Masseria served as vice president, patient health and impact, hospital and vaccine business units at Pfizer, and worked in health outcome vaccines at GSK. Dr. Masseria began her career in academia as a health economics researcher and lecturer at the London School of Economics and Political Science, LSE. Dr. Masseria has an MSc in health economics and a PhD in economics. I do want to take a quick minute to thank Jillian, our program director, all of our listeners, our viewers and subscribers, and of course our guests in 2025, making R2C, Road to Care podcast, one of the top healthcare podcasts in the country. And as we do sometimes, I will not just be the host with the microphone. I'm going to pass that golden mic, the torch, over to Syam Palakurthy, our CEO of SamaCare, to start with the intros and have a robust discussion. So welcome back, everybody.
Great. Well, thank you, Kip, and thank you, everyone, for listening. We are super, super excited about this conversation today. We have not just a panel, which is new for us, but also a panel of absolute global pharma all-stars. They have seen so much across so many different regulatory landscapes and so many different drug launches. So really excited for this. Maybe I will start with having each of the three of you just tell us a little bit about your background, what drew you to healthcare in the first place, and into health economics, into market access. Let's start with you, Amitabh.
Hi, a very good morning to all my fellow panelists. So just a 20-second spiel for me. I came from academia as an economist. I would say the work was intellectually rewarding, but abstract. What pulled me into health economics and market access was a chance to apply that rigor to real-world decisions where the analysis or the work I do affects the access to innovative medicine that biopharma is producing. So that's what attracted me.
Thank you so much, Amitabh. And Cree, will you tell us a little bit about what brought you into this landscape, what brought you into this world?
Thank you, and nice to be here. And similar to Amitabh, I started in academia where I was for more than 10 years in Europe, advising actually many countries on healthcare reforms and how to introduce health technology assessment for assessing medicines. And then, similar to Amitabh, I felt that although it was really important work advising policies, I was not really making an impact, a clear impact on the patients and all what the pharma industry and all the innovations that were emerging. And that is where they needed to join pharma and be involved myself in developing that type of data that beyond the clinical trial can help us show the value of the medicines, in particular when we negotiate with budget holders. Because often the data we create from the clinical trials are not sufficient to fully demonstrate the value across the whole population and in different settings and long term. So very pleased to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great. And Indranil, can you tell us about what was it that brought you to healthcare economics, market access, and pharma?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sam. And good morning, good afternoon. A real pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on this podcast. On my end, having grown up in India and having seen the disparities of care across populations and seeing the increasing need for innovation in the healthcare space and the need to make people live longer and live better lives. When I was thinking of a career, there was no better option than focusing on market access and working with the large healthcare systems to ensure medicines are accessible to as many patients around the world as possible and making the world a healthier place along the way. So again, really pleased to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Thank you, Indranil. And I think what's interesting to hear from all three of you is just this through line of how do we translate these really interesting sets of ideas into actual impact for patients? And even though you're all coming from fairly different backgrounds and fairly different parts of the world, that through line seems pretty clear. So it's really exciting to hear from you on this. Now, one of the other things that we're really excited about is we don't spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about the global perspective and how that differs, is informed by the US. And given the background that you all have, we're really excited to kind of dive into that and to get in there. So can you tell us what are the challenges and opportunities? And maybe, Amitabh, I'll start with you. The challenges and opportunities that you see when it comes to, in particular, this idea of value for a given treatment. How does that differ when it's in the US versus the global perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. So let me take a crack. It's a question that deserves maybe 2-3 hours, but I'll try to summarize it in 2-3 minutes. I think when it comes to definition of value, the fundamental difference between US and the rest of the world, it stems from the difference in the structure of healthcare system, as well as the assessment framework which they use, value assessment framework that they use, given the difference in structure of healthcare systems. I think if you look at three things, I'll say, if you look at US, it's a fragmented payer system, both horizontally as well as vertically. There are 100 plus commercial payers. There's Medicare, there's Medicaid, there's VA system. Even vertically, if you were to look at, there are more than 60 PBMs. As opposed to that, in Europe, it is primarily a single healthcare system, a single payer healthcare system. I think what is also the second point, what is also important is that there's no universally accepted value framework in US. Whereas if you look at the European side, there's an implicit or explicit cost effectiveness threshold that determines the value. The third thing I would say, again, it stems from the value assessment framework. There's no universally accepted comparator for value assessment when you're launching a new drug. In US, it's market driven. In Europe, it's mandated by HTAs. So if I were to summarize it, what I would say is that in the absence of a universal value framework, value is negotiated across different payers in US. In Europe, it is formally assessed through a centralized HTA framework. Now, what are some of the challenges related to that? I think the challenges in demonstrating value, number one, I would say, is this whole concept of rebate wall, where value it gets obscured by a rebate system. A drug may be of high clinical value, but it may be of low value to the PBM if the competitor offers a greater rebate. The second point is related to challenges, especially in the US. It's increasing political, what I would say, interventions. I think most favored nation is one. IRA is the second one. And on top of it, the access environment itself is getting more and more challenging. And then I think in US, there's no mechanism for seeking scientific advice for designing a trial, right? That is solely absent in US. That's a huge challenge for us. On the European side, I would say that there's a very narrow definition of value and clinical benefit. It's often driven by hard clinical endpoint, and not all dimensions of value get captured. And then on the value erosion side, I think it's very mechanistic on the European side that IRP actually governs how your price evolves over time. It is disconnected from demonstration of value over time. So those are some of the challenges that I would highlight. Let me stop here.
Maybe if I can add, I think Amitabh did an amazing overview. And as he said, I think we could talk about it for hours. And I think you have the three best people to do that. And your question is actually very relevant because we're in a moment in which value assessment is changing. And there is a lot of uncertainty as well. So there is change and uncertainty, which is not great. Clearly, there is at the moment a big focus on the cost of pharmaceuticals in the US and globally. And I think we're all aware of recent policies and promoted by the current administration to introduce reference pricing in the US and to leverage the other biggest economies, 8 biggest economies in the world for reference pricing. And reference pricing and value assessment are really not similar because when we talk about US, for example, leveraging France or Germany as a reference for their pricing, it would mean that the value approach that France is using would be similar to the value approach the US has. And we know this is very, very different. So something also to emphasize, the amount of resources the US spends on healthcare is very different than the amount of resources France or Germany spends on healthcare versus GDP. Because overall, I think the value and the cost, not just pharmaceuticals, of an X-ray or MRI is very different in the US than it is in Germany, France, or Japan, right? Now, when we start saying for pharmaceuticals, we want to use the same level of pricing, but we're not using the same level of pricing for all the other medical intervention or healthcare cost, we are creating some discrepancies, and that can actually disincentivize investment from pharmaceutical companies. And I think we're in a moment in which the US, I think, is still deciding where they should go and what is the best approach. I don't think we are at the arrival line. I think we are still running and identifying what is the best approach also for the US to assess value. But I wanted to emphasize reference pricing is not a value assessment tool, right? Yeah. And I think it's very important to clarify that.
Yeah, that's a really great point. We're hearing a lot more about the kinds of reference pricing we're using in a pricing abroad to determine pricing here, but it's not necessarily the same as as value, and there can be some different implications based on how different countries or different cultures value, different parts of the healthcare. And that actually, maybe, Indranil, I'd love to ask this next question to you. It gets us this question that I think sometimes comes up when people compare the U.S. to outside the U.S., which is the way that we treat prevention versus intervention. Can you talk about, Indranil, how are biopharmas looking at the difference between focusing on prevention versus focusing on intervention? And would love to hear that, in particular, how you think that affects the U.S. As we have so much talk right now, and over the last really 2 decades, about like how do we focus on prevention and preventive care more.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Sam. So what are the implications of prevention versus intervention for biopharma? I would say too often our health systems are focused on reactive treatment. As we all know, we call this a healthcare system, but actually it's more of a sickness care system, not really a system designed to promote health. So only around 3% of total health spending is actually dedicated to prevention across wealthy countries, meaning people live with diseases that could have been prevented or controlled earlier, and the health systems that must deal with those consequences of not treating those diseases earlier. However, we believe that prevention is the best medicine for patients, societies, health systems, and economies. Investing in prevention delivers better health outcomes, is cost-effective, and healthier people, this is nothing groundbreaking, healthier people are better able to contribute to economies and societies at large. So for every $1 invested in improving health, an economic return of between $2 and $4 is possible. But for vaccines, it's even higher. It could be up to $9. And by 2040, health improvements could add 12 trillion to the global GDP. So as we all think about how to help people live healthier lives, there is a clear opportunity to shift from funding sickness systems, as I mentioned before, to investing in health, enabling earlier action to prevent, diagnose, and treat disease, which would also improve the trajectory of economic growth. However, this wouldn't happen on its own. Again, as I said, today, incentives in most healthcare systems around the world, including the US, is geared towards treatment. There needs to be a fundamental shift to encourage more prevention upfront, to prevent consumers, patients, to slide down to more costly and more complicated morbidity areas. Yeah.
If I can add
Please.
some. So I think, as Indranil knows, I'm a big fan of prevention, and I worked for many years in vaccines. And I fully agree with what you were saying. One of the hurdles in doing so is budgeting. And often prevention budget and medicine intervention budget are separate. And so you have also the challenge. Also, prevention means long-term planning. Often when we think about budgeting for most of the budget holder, we're talking about 1 or 2 years budgets, and you will see the impact of prevention only long term. But in particular in today's society, where we have a huge number of chronic conditions that are actually causing the huge healthcare expenditures for our economies, prevention is the solution. Because majority of these chronic conditions could be prevented. They are preventable. And even if maybe you cannot avoid them, you can delay the onset or the impact of these is something that we need to keep in mind, right? But there are some policy barriers that need to be tackled to make sure that there are the right incentives, as Indranil was saying.
Yeah, I like this idea too of there being actual value and ROI for a country to actually invest in the prevention side. I'd love to hear, Amitabh, maybe if you could talk about, does that require a different approach to building a drug, to identifying the molecule, to launching the drug, that focus on prevention? And if so, how does it change what biopharma does need to do to really launch more of those preventive drugs?
Thank you, Sam. That's when Indranil was describing and Tree was following up. That's what I was thinking in terms of what it would take and what is fundamentally different for prevention versus treatment. I think one point I'll make is when you're talking of prevention, value is harder to prove or establish. Generally, prevention is related to benefits that accrue over longer term. So that's one. The second problem related under the same heading would be that outcomes are often probabilistic. So it's not determinate, it's probabilistic. You can sometimes try to bridging with surrogate markers in short term, but that generates uncertainty for the payers that they're not sure whether this will happen, right? So fundamentally, value becomes difficult to establish in the short term, and the traditional paradigm of randomized clinical trial does not work anymore. Related to that is, shift in evidence requirement. So, for example, I would give you 2-3 examples here. Repatha launched in 2015, but their outcomes data did not come till 2017. Now, if payers are saying that we will not cover you till the outcomes data comes, then you have lost those 2 valuable years, right? Similarly, if you look at Eliquis, the Aristotle trial came in 2015, but the data on reduction in bleeding and stroke came not till 2018, 2019 timeframe, right? So the question becomes, how do we better align with the traditional randomized clinical trial, or is there a different avenue altogether to establish the value of prevention? So that's the, fundamental shift. I think if you look at how biopharma is adapting, really the bridging link has to do something related to either outcome-based contracting or some warranty or preferential access for preventive therapy. So if you look at biopharma, they are already experimenting with newer models of value-based contracting. Also, if you look at pharma, they are now increasingly moving to beyond the pill solutions, right? Partnering with digital healthcare companies or diagnostic companies that has become a traditional model that has become embedded in the traditional thinking of biopharma, right? So those are some of the things that are already happening. And also, I would say if you think of not primary prevention, if you think of secondary and tertiary prevention, pharma has invested traditionally, I would think of it differently, has invested traditionally in prevention area, right? So, for example, if you think of early neurodegenerative diseases, these are all prevention models, right? You think of Parkinson's, you think of ALS, you think of MS, you think of Alzheimer's. These are all prevention models, right? You think of cardiometabolic diseases, right? GLP-1 explosion. These are all preventative therapy, right? If you look at oncology interception, these are all preventive models that biopharma is investing. So it'll take time, but I don't think this can be completely, we can completely move to a paradigm which says that, biopharma is not investing heavily in prevention. Yes, they are where the ROI is, and they are not in certain areas where they could do a better job. But fundamentally, the structure has to evolve. Structure of RCP, structure of how we demonstrate value has to evolve.
And thank you, Amitabh. I'd love to return this next question over to you. It relates to what Amitabh was just saying and what we were saying earlier around the different systems that the U.S. has versus the rest of the world, where potentially it's less determined by a national body or by a specific value body, but individual insurance companies. I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on what needs to change in terms of the incentives given that you have individual insurance companies in the US that are determining that value to make it so that it makes more sense. And, like Amitabh said, there are drugs that we have on the market that are preventive focused. There have been areas that's happening. What needs to change in terms of the incentives to make that an even bigger focus?
So, as I was saying, we are investing in prevention. Pharma is investing in prevention. And also we know that the budget holders are interested in particular systems more than others. One area I was mentioning before is really the need to look at budget differently. So many of the commercial payers, when they do their budgeting decision, it really short term is 1 year, 2 years, maximum 3 years. As we were saying, often for this preventive medicine, you will see the outcome only in the long term. And this horizon might not be sufficient really to demonstrate the value that you are giving to a patient or to your population by providing these medicines. And this is why Amitabh was saying one way is to use alternative approaches with outcome-based agreement or value agreement, but they can span across a longer time horizon than potentially the budget that the payers or the insurance companies are holding. And this in the past sometimes is creating some miscommunications, but I think we are all working through these, and now a lot of the insurance companies and they have actually value agreement and outcome-based agreement as an objective as well, and so they're really moving forward to use more and more these type of tools to demonstrate the value. In particular, because as Amitabh was saying, for a lot of these medications, the clinical trial is short-term. Often not even from the clinical trial, we can fully demonstrate the long-term value. And therefore, it's very hard, even when we have those pricing discussions, to align on those, what is the real value for the medicine. And that is where those outcome agreements are very important. And now there is the beauty, there is data everywhere, right? So the insurance companies, they have their own data. They can look at the data the way the pharma companies can look at the data, and we can collaborate together, identify what are the right outcomes, what do we want to measure, what is the right time horizon for this measurement, and adapt our pricing according to the results that we see over time. But as you can imagine, these negotiations are happening across a multitude of insurance companies. So it's very complex. While in Europe, let's say you're doing it maybe just with the French authority once. In the US, you have to do it many times. And potentially you have different outcomes with different insurance companies. So you have different models. So you can imagine the level of complexity. It's quite elevated. And what can happen is potentially for one insurer, you are in the formulary, for another one, you're not, for one, you are preferred, for another one, you're not, right? So that is why you see also these differences across insurance in access and reimbursement of different medications.
So one more thing. Actually, let me stop. This is really near and dear to my heart, this issue but let me stop and let Indranil comment.
No, not much more to add on my end. I mean, I think the misaligned incentives we have talked about, the need to capture the right data we have talked about. I think one specific challenge to US is because of the fragmented healthcare system. You could be, going through the process in a certain plan, but when the benefits accrue, you move to a different plan. So unless there's portability of insurance within US, that's the challenge we run into, which we don't run into in a socialized healthcare systems like France that Cristina was describing. Having said that, every healthcare system has its challenges, but if some sort of portability of insurance can be done within the US, that would encourage more preventive behavior. And then the last thing we didn't talk about is a lot of this also behavioral, right? So obesity, substance use, etc. I mean, these are behavioral notions that cannot be just fixed by medical intervention. These need to be accompanied by behavioral changes, which also needs to be part of the overall regimen along with medical care and everything else. So yes, the move towards preventive care is happening, but depending on the type of healthcare system, depending on the type of condition we're talking about, the challenges could be different, but nothing that cannot be addressed going forward. Thank you.
So this is one concrete idea for you, Syam, this portability mechanism, right? This is something that we have to work in US because of membership churn. And that's really, really the most important thing if we need to evolve towards prevention system. The other piece I would say, which is in the same spirit as Indranil said, is, evolution of benefit design to value-based insurance design. So if something is high-value care, there should be low-cost sharing, right, for patients. In US right now, it's exactly the opposite. If it is specialty care, it's very high cost for the patient. So value-based insurance design, that's the second piece that I would say that could happen. The third one is, I would say there has to be a separation between formulary placement and rebate. So this could be done very easily done by building transparency around rebate and spread pricing, right? So that's the third concrete idea for you. And then the fourth one, I would say, there has to be some sort of preferential, as I was saying, access or coverage for preventive therapy, which is not currently happening. So those are 3 or 4 concrete ideas.
Yeah, I love the concreteness of it. We've been talking a lot about the incentives, how we incentivize biopharmas, insurance companies, even patients. I'd love to hear if we just take a step back and if you could tell us, maybe Chris, starting with you, like, what do you think are the biggest access challenges to patients actually for the drugs that have actually been launched, or that where the molecule has been developed? What do you think the biggest access challenges are? And I'd love to hear your perspective on how it compares in the US versus outside of the US.
So often is price. And I think Indranil talked about these actual discrepancies between value and the share price that the patients are paying, where specialty care are extremely expensive in the US, but they bring huge value to the patients. And we know that the level of inequalities and capability to pay for the patients are very different. And although pharma companies are often providing vouchers or supporting the patients to cover some of the costs of these medications, they are really substantial costs, and they can disincentivize the patients from starting the treatment or even from continuing the treatment, because we're really talking about substantial costs. And many families, in particular, if you're not very well off, this might be very prohibitive. But the second element is also, I think, a full understanding of the benefits of the medication. And I think that is where the dialogue with your physicians, and now everything is available online. Sometimes it's an advantage, sometimes it's a disadvantage, because you read so much and you make your own interpretation of things. And we know what we know, we don't know what we don't know. And not often we don't know what we don't know. And so I always say that for me, all the wealth of information that is out there, it's amazing, but it's also difficult then to digest. And that is very important to have those very good conversations with your physicians and the experts, and to really understand what can be the advantages and disadvantages of this medication, in particular when we think about patients that potentially are taking a variety of medications, and there could be side effects or implication of using multiple medications. You really need to understand and know all the potential adverse events and implication that this can have on your body and on your quality of life. And often we don't The other element that is important, in the clinical trial, not often we collect those endpoints that are relevant for the patients. And we are looking at, let's say, for a cancer medication, right? The probability of living 3, 4, 5, 6 months more. But what if actually those 3, 4, 5, 6 months more, you spend them in a bathroom because you're chewing up, right? So that is not good for the patient. So clearly the patient doesn't have an incentive in taking the medication. But not often, or now we're doing more and more, and even FDA is investing on this. There is a huge now framework to push forward to really collect those endpoints that are relevant to the patients in terms of their quality of life, but also their experience and with the healthcare system and the impact that this has on their daily life, daily routine, capability to work, to bring their kids to school or to the park, because this has a huge impact on the probability of taking those medications.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And I want to ask this because it's so topical right now. We're seeing artificial intelligence being applied to a lot of different areas at the moment. Maybe, Indranil, I'll ask you this question. Do you have any thoughts on, and I'd love to hear from Amitabh and Kri as well, do you have any thoughts on where can artificial intelligence have an impact on the value, access, and pricing side? And where do you think it's just not going to make that much of a difference?
Thank you, Sam, for the question. Of course, artificial intelligence is the next big thing that we're all looking for the proof to happen. And I know it's being applied in many different areas. I think the application to healthcare may have been somewhat slower than some of the other industries that we're familiar with. When it comes to access, where can it help the most? It can help with predictability. In the end, drug development and access to medicines, the biggest piece that gets along the way is uncertainty of science. And that's where AI can step in. And just by simply looking at previous results that have been obtained and digging into those databases and help us plan better clinical trials, making sure the right population is included, making sure the right endpoints are included. And if we do all of that, what could be the predictability of the results, clinically, humanistically, economically, and driven by that, what could be the corresponding access? So I think that's where industry as well as the different stakeholders are trying to apply artificial intelligence. And by applying it successfully, if we can take some of the time lag out, so reduce the time to drug development, as well as take some of the cost out, reduce the cost of drug development, that could be a significant contribution to human society. So I would say, yes, if you have to focus on one area, that would be removing uncertainty. And the way we are doing pilots in terms of how we're applying AI is as we have to respond to the different, assessment agencies, health technology assessment agencies, just using AI to be able to respond quickly, just in time, and thereby reducing the need to engage in meetings and thereby reducing the need to wait and improving time to access to medicines. Yeah.
So 2 or 3 points here, in addition to, I think Indranil alluded to use of technology to enhance the RCT's randomized clinical trial. One way we should think about AI is that it has dramatically reduced the cost of doing real-world evidence, collecting real-world evidence data, right? So obviously, what are some of the ways in which real-world evidence can be scaled up with the help of AI? I'm not an expert in AI, but that's one of the opportunity. I think the second piece where AI can help us is in what I would say identification of subpopulations where the patient is more likely to respond to a particular treatment, right? And that actually feeds into how you can better design your clinical studies to demonstrate value, right? So if you can identify those subpopulation and if you can recruit based on that, avoiding the bias that is inherent in that kind of design. If you can do that, that is really important. And the third piece I would say, and this is getting into the technical aspects, but AI has enabled us to now, and NICE is using it, what is called dynamic economic models. So your cost effectiveness models are continuously updated in real time on a real time basis. So those are two or three ideas that comes to mind off the top of my head. The final piece I would say is that can we deploy AI to identify where value-based contracting has worked really well in the past, and then learn from that and apply that both in the payer and healthcare system setting as well as for biopharma.
Great, thank you. And Kriya, anything you'd want to add to that?
I think Indranil and Amitabh have covered most of it. And as Amitabh said, well, it's just the beginning. I think for me, 2025 was the boom, and everything now is in front of us, and 2026 will be the moment where actually we're going to see some of the results also in healthcare. And because some of those applications now are becoming real and we see the real impact. I think this will be a year, I suppose, full of those results of using AI and gaining more efficiencies and more predictability, as Indranil mentioned, which is key for budgeting.
Yep. That makes sense. And I know we're going to have to start wrapping the conversation. And as you might know, we have listeners who come from the provider side, from the biopharma side, the payer side, and even some of the policy making and regulatory side. I'd love for each of you, and maybe starting with Amitabh and then Kriya and then Indranil, if you just have one piece of advice or one recommendation, and you can direct it to any of those four stakeholders, the provider, biopharma, the payer, or the regulatory side. What one piece of advice or ask would you make to one of those groups to kind of move this forward so more patients are able to get on the right treatment at the right moment in time?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question, Sam. I think off the top of my head, what comes to my mind is this whole concept of fragmentation on the payer side, right? Especially in the US healthcare system. And we in biopharma are often complaining that it's too fragmented, too challenging, and it's not possible and it is beyond repair. I think what my advice to leaders like Kriya and Indranil in biopharma is would be that market access in 2026 is no longer about winning every negotiation with PBM. It is about what I would say managing the trade-offs, right? If PBM says no, put patients to cash channel. GLP-1 have demonstrated that. If employer says something is too expensive, offer them outcomes-based contract. If government says, well, it's too high, then manufacturers can accept MFP in return for larger volume. So that's what I think. I think we should focus more on what are the trade-offs and what is feasible within the context of those trade-offs, rather than complain about healthcare system and its fragmentation.
Yeah, I love that. It's very realistic and realism-driven, but very actionable. Kriya, how about you?
So I would ask them to talk more among each others. And because at the end of the day, we all share the same objective, which is improving the health of the society and making sure the right patients gets the right medicine at the right time. Because all of us, wherever we sit, we are patients, or we have patients in our families, right? So I feel we need to improve the level of trust and collaboration and dialogue. And if we are able to do that, I feel that a lot of those disincentives and fragmentation can be resolved. And that is going back to Amitabh, right? We can find a different way of doing things, but we can only do that if we have a very honest and open dialogue where we are listening to each other's needs and we try to find productive and efficient solutions together.
Okay. And not much more to add on my end. I think we started the conversation with fragmentation of the healthcare system. I would end the conversation in the exact opposite place, which is how can we get to a holistic approach to healthcare? And I think that's what both Cristina and Amitabh alluded to. Every different stakeholder has a different role to play. They have different needs. They have different skills and capabilities, which requires us to engage in dialogue, which Cristina has already referred to. It also requires us to put each other in other shoes and try to understand where they're coming from and what they're bringing to the table. But in the end, if we can have a more holistic approach to healthcare, make prevention along with treatment a part of the whole cycle, and in the end, making sure whether it's in a long-term view, whether it's view across different segments, we have the ultimate patient benefit in mind and drive towards that. I'm confident we can improve access to medicines and thereby make the world a better place. So putting a plug for holistic healthcare, and thank you for inviting us to this podcast.
Yeah, well, that seems like a really wonderful note to end on. Thank you all for taking the time. I know you're in different time zones, different parts of the world. So we're thrilled that we could get the three of you in your brains in one place in one conversation together.
Yes, thank you all. And I always end with an Easter egg question, by the way. Syam, thank you for hosting, as usual. Masterful. Look, we spend 17% of our GDP here, and I don't think we're going to solve this overnight because the troubles certainly didn't happen 24 hours ago. But we'd love to have you back on to talk about access, cost, prevention, the great debate on PBMs, which is a pretty hot topic here right now, payer uniformity. So here's my Easter egg question. And again, thank you all for your time. I don't know if you saw the big news, but steak has just been put back at the top of the pyramid in our dietary plans. I don't know if you saw that. It was moved back to the top, and I've got 3 doctors on. Thumbs up or thumbs down. I'm personally very pleased with that decision.
How can I put a thumbs down for steak?
That's one. That's a sideways. That's a thumbs down. All right. I get the final vote, 2-1, 2-2. We tied. Okay. Thank you, guys. Hey, again, Happy New Year. Appreciate you all being on the show. 2026, off to a great start on the Road to Care podcast. And again, together we can make things right. Look forward to seeing you again this year. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you for joining the Road to Care podcast hosted by SamaCare, the leader in prior authorization technology and services, where through a script-to-therapy operating system, we enable connectivity with clinics, payers, and manufacturers focused on optimizing patient care. Tune in next time, as together we can make things right. Enjoy the music written, produced, and recorded by Jamestown.